Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with the Victorian Literature Journey Tag. I was tagged by Roz when she and Tilly adapted this tag that was originally done for Shake Timber. I believe I was also tagged in that a couple of times, and I somehow just never got around to it in the month of September. So I'll have to wait until next year, sadly enough. And so I vowed to myself that I wasn't going to have to wait until next year with this one. This is a really interesting tag. It has been fascinating to see everyone's answers to this. So I decided that I would do this kind of off the cuff. It seems like that's mostly what people have been doing. It's been a very chatty tag, which I just think has been a lot of fun and just a joy to watch. But this tag is essentially all about the journey that you have taken with Victorian literature over the years. So let's go on and get into the questions. What was your first experience reading Victorian literature and how was it? And I really racked my brain on this one because I've said it before on my channel. I really was not exposed to Victorian literature a great deal in school. And I mean that even in high school and stuff like that, not just at the university level. At the university level, my focus was in late medieval, early Renaissance. And so I just never got this modern. And it seems like even in high school, we were rarely assigned anything that was this modern. But we did have a project in our final year, our senior year of high school, where we each got to choose one Victorian novel. And it basically didn't matter which one. And I think everyone in the class wound up picking different Victorian novels for this. And we wrote a paper on it and what its impact on us kind of was. And I chose Wuthering Heights, I will tell you, for a very basic reason. I was a Twilight girly. Wuthering Heights is Bella's favorite book in Twilight. And in fact, the edition that I have of Wuthering Heights, I still own this edition, was one that was republished during the height of Twilight. And so it kind of has a Twilight-esque cover. It really reminds me of New Moon, like the one with the flower on it. That's basically what my cover of Wuthering Heights is. And I think they re-released stuff like Romeo and Juliet, and then maybe Jane Eyre also with this cover. I really loved Wuthering Heights, and I feel like looking back, I could not possibly have chosen a better book to begin my Victorian literature journey with, because there's just something about Wuthering Heights that I think is unique to it and really isn't captured anywhere else in the time period, but I think is also just very approachable and understandable for someone who is in their late teens. Reading Wuthering Heights at 17 versus reading it at, I don't know, maybe 26, 27, those are vastly different experiences. And I've talked a lot about Wuthering Heights in the past couple of weeks here on my channel because I did kind of a survey of my subscribers finding out which were their worst Victorian classics and which were their best. And Wuthering Heights showed up multiple times on each list. And so I've done a lot of thinking about Wuthering Heights since it seems like it's a book that people either love or hate. And I got a comment on one of those videos that talked about the fact that Wuthering Heights must be one of those season of life books. And it hits you differently when you were younger versus when you were older. And while some books really get better with you with age, you kind of love them more as you reread them with age, I don't think Wuthering Heights is that type of book. Now, for me, it kind of is. I just love the atmosphere and I love the vibe, but I'm really grateful that Wuthering Heights was my first kind of foray into the realm of Victorian literature. But I think other than that, I just started reading Victorian literature when I found BookTube. And so I started reading it in the few months, I think, before I started my BookTube channel. So really, I'm very new to this. Has the reading of a Victorian novel ever brought you to tears? If so, tell us more. And I was going to say no. My initial reaction when I read this question was just no. I don't think I have ever really been moved by a classic like that at all. But then I remembered one classic really did bring me to my knees. I really was crying. Like a lot of times you say you cry when you're reading a book, and you typically just mean you got a little bit choked up, your throat closed up a little bit. No, I'm talking actual tears, and that was A Tale of Two Cities. If you didn't cry at the end of A Tale of Two Cities, I just don't know what to tell you. There's something about that, and you know what is so weird about it is that when you think about the entire picture of A Tale of Two Cities and how it is written, how the characters are structured, When you think about it on an objective level, I think there are only a couple of characters that stand out and that are really done masterfully. And those characters carried this novel on their back. And it's because of them the ending is so poignant and so beautiful. It really is, to me, the best ending that I have read in literature. And Charles Dickens will always be one of the greats, if only for the way this book ended. And I've also seen people complain about A Tale of Two Cities, also for those videos. And several people have said to me that this ending deserved to be at the back half of a better book. And you know, I'm not really going to argue with you. I think that's probably true. But there is still something to the way the last 2 or 3 chapters are executed. It makes your stomach kind of sink. You start to feel dread. You almost feel nervous. Your heart is racing a little bit. It's honestly incredible to me that a classic book can have that effect on you. And frankly, just in general, that a novel can have that effect on you. I feel like I'm a very visual person 9 times out of 10. And so it's not really often that books move me in that way. So this is remarkable to me, not just in terms of Victorian literature or classics at large. It's remarkable to me just in terms of my reading journey. I have only been this emotional at one other book, and that book was actually a retelling of A Tale of Two Cities. So there you have it. Are there any people who have played a significant role in your Victorian literature journey? Yes. And I think most of us here on BookTube know them. Definitely, I have to say the hosts of Victober when I first started watching BookTube and right around the time that I started my channel, Ange, Lucy the Reader, Katie from Books and Things, and of course, Kate Howe. I've said in the past, Kate Howe was one of the first booktubers that I ever discovered. And so I really do think I owe a lot to those 4 in general. They really opened my mind and they really clued me in to a lot of stuff that isn't a big name. Coming into the realm of Victorian literature at all, I knew a few of the big names. I knew Great Expectations. I knew A Tale of Two Cities, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, just really a handful. And I guess because I never approached this subject matter in school, a lot of the big ones are completely lost on me, and frankly, I had never heard of them. I had never heard of Middlemarch before getting onto BookTube. North and South was one that I had never heard of before watching BookTube. And so I owe a lot specifically to the hosts of Victober to opening my mind and to also informing me about books that I never would have discovered on my own. 100% Katie from Books and Things is the reason I tried Dickens. And I'm sure that there are many people here on BookTube who would say that. She has definitely sold him so well over the years. I feel like a lot of us tried Dickens and committed to Dickens because of her really positive enthusiasm for his work. Kate Howe is why I tried North and South. She's the only reason that I tried Elizabeth Gaskell, and she's possibly the only reason that I had ever heard of her. And I remember Ange's channel. I do hope she comes back and makes videos again one day, but she really read things that were lesser known to me. And so they might have been popular here on BookTube, but I certainly had never heard of them. So she was really instrumental to me in kind of expanding my TBR and learning what was out there more than just the big popular few. And Lucy the Reader, of course, I always associate with the Brontes. And the Brontes have been some of the biggest joys for me in terms of Victorian literature. So I really do have a lot to thank those 4 booktubers for. They have definitely been instrumental in my Victorian literature journey. Do you have a favorite film or TV adaptation of a book? And also, are there any that you would like to see made? And so that's interesting. I don't know that I have ever seen an adaptation that I truly loved. I don't often revisit things year to year. I know a lot of people do. Like when I'm watching Victober TBRs, a lot of times people will mention that they're going to rewatch one of their favorite adaptations. And I don't have anything that has really gotten to that level for me, but I do really love Dickensian. Dickensian is a show that I would say is probably a very loose adaptation of some of Charles Dickens's works, and it blends together multiple different characters from the majority of his novels. The unfortunate thing about this is that it definitely does spoil you for some big aspects of a couple of his novels. It also sets up some others, which I think is done extremely well. But the one that it spoils, I'll tell you, is Bleak House. And I have not read Bleak House, but I was talking to a friend of mine who had, and I was telling him about Dickensian, and I was like, oh, and this, so-and-so and so-and-so had this happen. And he was like, that's the major twist of Bleak House. So go into this with some trepidation. And I also love the Douglas Booth Great Expectations. Please don't get me started on Douglas Booth. He is my muse. Douglas Booth makes me feel like a Renaissance artist with a muse, honestly. Every time that I see him, I want to write something. There's just something about his face. He really just has it all for me. And so I knew I would love this adaptation of Great Expectations. He is so stunning, but he absolutely should be Pip. I really do think he can characterize Pip so extremely well. In terms of things I would like to see adapted, I am kind of shocked that we haven't seen more in the realm of Robert Louis Stevenson adaptations. I mean, truly in the past few years. I'm looking for Treasure Island. I know we had Black Sails. Black Sails was incredible, but we should still have a Treasure Island adaptation. Pirates never get old. I feel like we're in desperate need of a new Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In fact, I would say most of those kind of Gothic classics or even the Halloween classics, I don't think they have been revisited often enough in recent years. But a favorite that I would like to see adapted, I think, would be Armadale. I think Armadale by Wilkie Collins would have some mass appeal, and I think it would be very interesting to see adapted because there's a lot of it that's kind of internal, but there's a lot of it that you're trying to figure out, and I think would kind of be aided by the visual medium. I also just selfishly would love to see Romola done because I love the Italian Renaissance. Which character in Victorian literature most resembles you, or who you identify with the most? This is really hard because I honestly don't know who resembles me the most. And I don't know that there are many characters that I identify with. Marion, I guess, from The Woman in White, because she's a little bit masculine for the time period. She's described as wearing pants and being very forceful and assertive. And I feel like that's more my vibe than kind of the meek female characters of Victorian literature. But maybe I would say Margaret Hale from North and South. I feel like Margaret had a strong conception of who she wanted to be, and she didn't give that up. She had a lot of principles, and she would not give that up for him. And that is something that I really respect. I'm very principled. I'm going to stick to my guns, and you're not going to change my mind, especially on important topics. You are not going to change my mind. And so maybe I would say Margaret Hale. I really love her, so maybe I just want to be like her, but I definitely can see shades of myself there. But who resembles me the most? I don't know. And I saw someone else do this tag, and they were like, maybe I don't want to know who resembles me the most. And that's really funny. That's kind of the way I feel. Do you have a favorite moment, scene, or line from Victorian literature? And if so, could you share it with us or read it to us? And since I'm doing this off the cuff, I won't read it to you. This was very hard. And so I told myself that I have to go with what automatically popped to mind. Believe it or not, it was a scene from Jane Eyre that popped into mind. And I still think about this scene in terms of high romance. I think this was honestly the scene that turned me into a reader that could read romance in general, not just in terms of classics. I think it opened up my eyes to the idea of romance in a classic, which I just thought would be kind of fumbled. And in general, I think it just made me reevaluate my relationship with romance, period, which was really great because I have really thoroughly enjoyed romance in other books over the years. And so this scene happens when something goes down in the house. I won't tell you what. Jane is in her nightgown. Mr. Rochester is in his dressing robe. He has to come into her room. And some of what has happened is that water has kind of soaked the carpet. Water is all over the floor. And he comes over to her and takes his dressing robe off and puts it around her shoulders. And I know you're saying, Jenny, are you okay? No. This really was just a very quick scene. It was just a couple of sentences and it was over. But I took the time to really visualize it. I'm someone who kind of sees the movie in their head when I'm reading a book. I know some people don't, but I do. And so I took the time to like really visualize this. And then I also kind of put myself in the mindset of the Victorian reader, somebody reading this for the first time, kind of at publication date, and just how scandalous I think that would have been for a man to have seen her in her dressing gown and then to have taken his robe off and given it to her so that she didn't catch sickness. There was something unspeakably sexy about that scene to me, and it has been rarely replicated elsewhere. Everyone on my channel, I know most of y'all tell me that you hate Rochester and you think he's creepy. I know, and I don't care. I don't care. I'm here to tell you I don't care. Rochester is my problematic fave. Would I go out with him? Yes. Is it purely because of this scene? Maybe. There have been other scenes of romance since, and in fact, there are other scenes in Jane Eyre specifically that also reach that level of real sexiness that's not just hinted at, but is really forward on the page. And so there are other scenes that are definitely more present and probably more vibrant that I could talk about, but there is something about that. It was just that small gesture, and then thinking of him seeing her in that vulnerable position, thinking of her seeing him in that vulnerable position at a time when that would have been anathema. It was just unbelievable to me. And in fact, it still kind of gives me chills. That's the Brontes for you. Does any Victorian literature intimidate you? If so, what and why? And initially, I would have said no. I feel like I am at a point in my relationship with Victorian literature where I don't necessarily feel intimidated by length. Once you have read something that was over 1,000 pages long, there's really not a lot that can intimidate you. And some of the stuff that I am interested in steering clear of is not necessarily because I am intimidated by them, but it's more so because I believe I know who I am as a reader at this point and what I'm interested in, and I just don't think I would be interested in that. And so, like George Eliot, I know is very intimidating for a lot of people. And at this point, I would say I'm not really interested in reading much more from her, not because I'm intimidated by her, but because I know that her writing style isn't really for me 9 times out of 10. I have DNF'd more from her than I have finished. But I would say The Whirlpool by George Gissing is a book that has really intrigued me in the past, but is one that most people say you probably should steer clear of just based on language alone. It's a book that takes a lot out of you and it requires a lot of work. So that is one I guess I would say I'm kind of intimidated by, but honestly, no. I feel like Victorian literature is really easy to read. Once you've read 1 or 2, you've kind of gotten yourself into the mindset of the time period. And so even when you take a break and you come back after a while, you'll still find them very approachable, in my opinion. They are really modernly written. Now, some authors just don't work for you, but typically things that kind of intimidate me, or what used to intimidate me about any book, modern or classic, would have been length. And now I feel like, since I've flown through some really long books in the past couple of years, I don't think I can say that length is something that intimidates me anymore. So now I would say it would be either subject matter or the style of writing that the author has. And I'm just not going to read anything that's about subject matter I'm not interested in. So I also don't feel like I can say that. So I'm going to say that I'm not really that intimidated by any Victorian literature. If I had to say something, I definitely would say The Whirlpool, but otherwise, I feel very comfortable with Victorian literature, I'm kind of happy to say. What tips would you give to someone early on in their journey with Victorian literature? This is something I kind of mentioned in the last question, but I would say don't be intimidated by them. I think that's the hard thing about classics in general, and I think that's the intimidation factor for a lot of people when they want to come back and they want to read classics on their own without the aid of school. I think a lot of people are just intimidated by the language, the length, kind of the subject matter in some cases. To me, the Victorians are very approachable and very easy to read. And they are some of the best classics to start with. When I started reading Victorian literature, I was blown away at how easy it was to read. And also how modern most of them feel. I feel like once you get into these books, you're really going to enjoy them and they're going to fly by. But a piece of advice I would definitely give you is read something that you would read today. This is the hardest thing for me, and it was a really hard lesson to learn. I wanted to read things that were classics because they were classics. I wasn't really picking them up because they interested me, and that's the wrong thing to do. If you're someone who would not read a thriller mystery today, I don't think there's any need to read a thriller mystery from the Victorian time period. For me, that's literary fiction. I'm not a big literary fiction person in the modern day, so why would I read what would have been considered literary fiction of the Victorian period? And I think there was so much being published during the Victorian period, there's definitely something out there that will appeal to you. Another piece of advice I would give you is to give the book a little bit of time to get going, because I found this to be true, especially in the past couple of years where I have taken long breaks from classics. It takes you just a little bit to trick your mind back into the time period. And it's also worth being cognizant of the way these books were published. So you do kind of need to give them a little bit more time than you would a modern novel to get going. They're going to spend a lot of time setting up the board, so to speak, before the game gets started. And I think that's fun in some ways, and in some books it really works. In others, that's very tedious. And so it's up to you whether you want to go through that or not. It's up to you to decide if it's worth the wait to get to the good stuff. But I think a lot of the time, it really is worth the wait. So I would say give yourself 100 pages or so before you decide to DNF something. What is your top recommended read for other readers of Victorian literature? Oh gosh, this is so hard because I feel like there are a couple of obvious choices for me. The first one is one that I have not shut up about for the past 365 days. That's Varney the Vampire. Please, more people read this because it really is good. I hesitate to recommend this because I feel like if I do and people are like, Jenny, this makes absolutely zero sense and there's no continuity to this, you're right. I honestly can't even tell you that it's a perfect book. And I can honestly say that I can tell a lot of people would be really frustrated with it. So it's a book that I kind of hesitate to recommend. But seriously, every time I think about it, I honestly wonder why more people aren't reading it, because it really is fantastic. So I do want to say Varney the Vampire. I also, of course, would want to mention a Wilkie Collins. I think everyone knows I love The Woman in White. But the book of his I think people are sleeping on is Jezebel's Daughter. I feel like if you enjoyed Armadale, if you enjoyed No Name, if you enjoyed really any of the big four, The Moonstone and The Woman in White included, Jezebel's Daughter has all of those elements in a shorter page count. And so I think that would be less intimidating to read. It's also really quick. And it's one of my favorites of his. It's in my top 5, I would say. So I would definitely say to read Jezebel's Daughter. Next is just to tag people. So I'm going to go through my subscription feed and see who hasn't done this yet and who hasn't been tagged. But I think off the top of my head, I'd like to tag Tori from Good Strong Words. I don't think she's done this yet. I'll tag Christy. I'll tag Kate Howe, Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia. And I'm trying to think. I feel like I haven't seen them do it yet. So I'll say that I'll tag them, but I'm going to go through my subscriptions feed and I'm going to tag some others. So that was the Victorian Literature Journey Tag. That was really fun. And it was really fun to kind of do it off the cuff like this. So I hope that y'all enjoyed a chattier tag. But that's going to be all from me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Happy Victober. Goodbye.